Hello everyone, and a warm welcome from our side. My name is Jana Popova, and I am the UPATI Content Development Coordinator. I'm involved in the content development and delivery of some of the UPATI trainings. And today it is my great pleasure to participate in this webinar and also to present the outcomes of this project that we organize in cooperation between UPATI, independent researchers, and Boehringer Ingelheim team regarding understanding the specifics of living with pulmonary fibrosis. The name of the project, as you can see also on the slide, is Understanding Breathlessness, Exploring Patient Experience in Pulmonary Diseases Through Interpretative Research, and we are going to share more insights about it in the next few slides. So I'm really looking forward to this webinar, and I hope that we are going to have a very fruitful discussion at the end. And as Tamas mentioned, please feel free to raise your hand and put your questions also in the chat. And in the end, we also dedicated some time for a Q&A, so you can be able to ask your questions. Next slide, please. Before we move on, we would like to share a little bit more about the design of the project and its structure. We would like to acknowledge that the first discussions between Boehringer Ingelheim team and UPATI took place in February 2024, which were followed by planning and additional discussions in September 2024. The official project launch was in December 2024 with a planned time frame of 6 months, but after several months, we realized that we need a little extension until December 2025. The main task of the project was understanding what it means to live with pulmonary fibrosis, including scleroderma patients with pulmonary fibrosis, by using the phenomenological analysis of interview. The interview guide and all related materials for the interviews were co-created with two patient umbrella organizations in the field, EUPFF and FESCAM. We were in close collaboration with both organizations during the development of the project, and we would like to thank them for their contribution. We also developed cooperation with local patient groups and national organizations in the recruitment for the interviews. We collaborated with national patients organizations and standalone patients from Hungary, France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Bulgaria, Greece, and United Kingdom. We would like to thank all people who were open and ready to share their stories and participated in the interviews. And now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce the main investigator of the project, Dr. Tamas Beretsky, who is also going to share more information about the phenomenological research and also more insights related to the project. Tamas, back to you.
Thank you, Jana. I'm so happy to see all of you gathered here today, and it's a real thrill and a pleasure to present this research to you. My name is Tamas Beretsky. I'm a patient researcher, a patient advocate. Have been working primarily in HIV, viral hepatitis, and mental health for about 20 years now, both as a peer helper, as a patient advocate, and also as a researcher. I have been partnering with UPATI for many, many years. And you may have come across my name in that context, but I also do independent research into understanding the patient experience and also how patient organizations and patient advocacy work. As a result of this engagement, we came to this project where we try to introduce a new methodology and try to use this novel approach to understanding the patient experience, which is based on research and work by several people who came before us, especially a philosopher called Javi Carel in Bristol, who herself also lives with a progressive lung disease, who was the first to describe the phenomenology of breathlessness based on her own lived experience. And we took that knowledge, we took that approach and took it a step further, to trying to understand what breathlessness, especially pulmonary fibrosis, and living with pulmonary fibrosis means for patients who are affected by these conditions, and not just them, but also their environment, their family, their caregivers, friends, co-workers. So the entire world around the patient who lives with pulmonary fibrosis. Now, the whole tenet of phenomenology is based on this idea that the world exists to the extent that we experience it. So, if we want to understand what it means to live with a disease, we need to understand what this experience actually means to the patient. We also take this approach that this is a constant process. This is a meaning-making process, trying to navigate the world as it changes, as it is for the patient that lives with a condition. You will have noticed that this is different from what we usually do in the so-called positivistic tradition, where we describe the world and an illness in strictly numerical, quantitative ways. Instead, we try to focus on the subjective experience and try to describe the subjective experience as thickly, as thoroughly as only possible. Of course, this can be a slippery slope, because how can you describe the subjective experience without becoming very vague? Therefore, we use this well-described methodology of phenomenological analysis, where we apply a predefined framework. And I will come to say a few more words about what this framework entails, in order to understand and in order to standardize the description of the experience of the patient that lives with a given disease, pulmonary fibrosis in this case. So on the one hand, we use a rich description of the experience that comes from the participants, that comes from the interviewees themselves. At the same time, when we do the analysis, we do have a framework to do the analysis that will sort of standardize or give a general understanding for what the salient points are, or maybe for the patients that describe the experience. So if we want to compare traditional research and phenomenological research, there are a couple of points that stand out. Traditional research concentrates on qualitative data collected usually through surveys or questionnaires. These can be on paper, like hard copy, but these can be also digitalized, where usually the end result is a list and the quantification of symptoms, like, the amount of oxygen absorbed in your blood, or your pulse, or how well you perform according to certain scales. This can also be combined with qualitative data. We see a lot of examples for that in quality of life research and with certain sets of patient-reported outcome measures. But the ultimate focus is on hypotheses and on outcomes, like hard numbers and endpoints. Now, in contrast, in case of phenomenological research, it is primarily a qualitative approach, where we collect qualitative data through interviews and the analysis of text corpuses. In this case, symptoms are not so important. It's much more important for us to describe and understand the lived experience. And also we focus on the meaning making. So rather than us trying to ascribe value or meaning to numbers, we focus on what meaning the participants, the patients themselves, ascribe to the experience of living with the disease, which also means that we are open to any outcome. We don't have a real hypothesis, like there's nothing that we expect our participants to say, but instead we just focus on what they say, and then we try to analyze and describe that. So once again, to give you a very concise overview of this, we focus in this method or in this methodology on depth rather than breadth. So we don't have to have a huge number of participants in order to come to a good understanding of what stands out for the participants that sit for an interview with us, and that's also how we structure then the interviews. And as we come to talk about the results, we will also explain to you a little bit how these interviews were structured, and how then the analysis happened, and what were the key salient points that we found, and that we wanted also to discuss, not just present to you, but also discuss with you, following in this tradition of a phenomenological conversation, where we try to dig deeper into the experience and gain new facets of understanding. And with this, I would like to pass the floor to Daniela Rojas Castro, fellow investigator. And we also actually have Dominic Hamelenk here today with us, who was the third investigator, or fourth, together with Jana Popova. But Dominic will be available for answering your questions when we get to the questions and the comments part at the end. So it's over to Daniela.
Thank you, Tamas, and welcome everybody. So I am going to start with this slide that is going to stress what Tamas has already said. So phenomenology, as Tamas has explained, is this kind of research that is going to focus on the lived experience and not only on medical symptoms or clinical outcomes. So it's about what actually means to live day after day with a chronic condition. So the approach is not thinking about the disease, about something that is happening in the lungs, but it's much more about how we're going to move, how we're going to plan every day, how we're going to relate to the others, how we think about the future, and even how we are going to understand ourselves because of this condition. So phenomenological research allows these aspects to be described in a very rich and detailed way. And it helps because it's going to bring forward needs that several times are invisible in standard healthcare conversations, such as emotional burden, loss of independence, social isolation, or the effort that requires to manage breathlessness all the time. This kind of understanding, so it's not theoretical. It can open new entryways to better interventions, because it will allow how to improve rehabilitation, communication, support services, and even how clinical trials should be designed. So we think that the benefit of this approach is that it helps connect medicine with real life. Slide. So a few words on the methodology. We interviewed 10 people living with pulmonary fibrosis, including 2 participants with scleroderma-related pulmonary fibrosis. As Tamas has already said, the goal was not to collect stats. It was to listen deeply to personal experience and identify shared patterns across different lives. So the interviews were long, open, allowing participants to speak freely about diagnosis, treatment, daily routines, relationships, fears, hopes. All the interviews were transcribed and translated into English when necessary. And then they were carefully analyzed by 4 researchers. From this analysis, we produce a systematic description of common themes while also respecting differences between individuals. The final outcome is a set of findings, but also recommendations that can help improve care, support, and understanding what it truly means to live with this condition. Slide. For doing this, we use a questionnaire that it was not the classical rigid questionnaire, but we work with open prompts designed to invite storytelling and reflection. We ask participants about the time of diagnosis, or about what pulmonary fibrosis means to them, how were their global experience with their current treatments. We also ask them to describe an average day, because daily life often reveals the hidden work of living with breathlessness, pacing, planning, adapting, managing energy. Relationships were another key focus, because many people share how family life, friendships, and interactions with healthcare professionals change over the time. And finally, and very importantly, we invite participants to speak about their hopes and dreams for the future. This question was essential because it captures not only difficulty, but also resilience and meaning. Overall, this questionnaire was a guide, but the interviews remain flexible, shaped by what mattered most to each participant. And then, next slide, we also need to speak about, oops.
Yeah,
Go,
sorry.
Go.
This is the one, yes.
Yeah, the limitations, because no study is never perfect. This is and if someone tells you so, it's not true. There are always limitations. There are always things that we didn't expect, etc. Regarding this study, first of all, we follow all the ethical standards and work carefully with patient organizations, but we were not able to obtain a formal ethics approval. This was mainly because the project was not affiliated with a university or a clinical institution. That is how classical and formal research works. This is reflecting a broader challenge, is that patient-led or community-based research often faces unclear pathways for ethics review, even when conducted very responsibly. And if we want to do more of this kind of research, we need to work on these procedures. Recruitment was also slow and difficult. Pulmonary fibrosis is a rare condition, and reaching people across different countries requires strong collaboration with local groups. Despite our efforts, we were only able to include 2 participants with scleroderma, meaning that this perspective is present but not deeply represented. And then some participants were also less comfortable with digital tools. So a few interviews had to be done by phone rather than video. And in some cases, the recording quality made automated transcription difficult, which required much more manual work. And finally, the language. We, as you saw before, we conducted in the interviews in multiple languages and then translated into English. While this allows a broader participation, it also means that some cultural nuances or expression may not be perfectly captured. Thomas.
So I also wanted to quickly go back and speak about the structure, following up on the method. I acted as the principal investigator for this project. You've already heard from Jana and from Daniela. They also participated in the interviews and in the analysis as co-investigators, and also Dominique Hamelink. You may know Dominique already, and maybe she will turn on her camera and say hello to you. You may know Dominique from other respiratory diseases, She's been working in the field for many, many years. But we also collaborated with the UPFF and with FESCA, who reviewed the interview guide and also the informed consent form. Ultimately, we received a lot of administrative support and hosting of the project from UPATI, notably Jana Popova and Maria Dutat, who's the executive of UPATI. And last but not least, obviously, this project was financially supported with an unrestricted grant from Boehringer Ingelheim. So we wanted to acknowledge that as well. Back to the demographics, and that's Daniela again.
Yes. So we spoke with 10 individuals across 7 European countries, as Hannah has already said: Greece, Hungary, France, Netherlands, Bulgaria, United Kingdom, and Belgium. So this diversity allows us to capture different healthcare contexts, social environments, and everyday realities. The mean age of participants was 62. 2 participants were living with scleroderma, and 2 participants have also undergone lung transplantation, offering insights into life both before and after such a major intervention. All the participants had a higher education degree, and they live in very different geographical settings, from small rural communities to large cities. This matters a lot because daily life with pulmonary fibrosis is shaped not only by symptoms, but also by access to care, mobility, and social support. All interviews were conducted in full and in depth, allowing participants to share rich personal narratives. And while this is a small group, it provides a meaningful range of experience that help us understand these common themes that we are going to present now. Tamas.
Indeed. So let's see what the key findings are, and we've summarized them on 2 slides. So I will speak to the first set of key findings, and then Daniela will take over with the second set. What we found most importantly, and this is also in more or less in an order of prevalence, if you like. So what the participants were talking about in a dominant or in a perceivably important way. So first of all, the diagnosis, and this is not a surprise, but the diagnosis is not a moment, but it is a rupture in time. So it means that for many, receiving a diagnosis for pulmonary fibrosis often it takes months or even years, and that involves a lot of uncertainty and trying to follow up on whatever is happening to their health and to their body. There's a very important thing that we found basically from everyone who participated in the interviews, that there are certain prognostic messages which have a massive impact on the outlook of the participants on life or on the patients. Notably, wherever you look or whichever doctor you speak to, you will hear that you have 2 to 3 years to live. In contrast, all of our participants have been living with pulmonary fibrosis for much longer than 2 to 3 years, right? So but that also involves a lot of uncertainty. This continues to echo in your mind for years, even if you clearly outlive this timeline. We found that breathlessness reorganizes everyday life. Every action becomes intentional. You have to plan what you do. You need to pace your actions. You need to budget your energy. You need to plan every movement that you make. Which also means that the body becomes something that you have to negotiate with. Things that you took for granted before the diagnosis or before the development of this condition can no longer be taken for granted, but you have to make concessions, you have to negotiate with your own body. Your stability becomes fragile, and occasional flare-ups will make you feel will make your life feel unpredictable, which also leads to an interesting feature that the world becomes smaller, and it also is redefined. So the world around you becomes redefined. Travel, work, daily routines, social spaces that you inhabit will shrink because the distances become shorter as you become more breathless. And that also means that you have to adapt to new rhythms in your life. And ultimately, this also means that relationships will change. And these changes may be very profound. Um, your partner, your romantic partner, or your spouse may become your caregiver, which is a very different, or maybe a very different role. Friendships may fade or change, but also new support communities, new friendships may emerge that are related, that are connected to the illness or to the condition that you live with. Daniela?
Yeah, other key insight was the role of the caregivers. Participants made it very clear that the illness is never carried by the patient alone. Partners and family members often share the emotional load through support, vigilance, coordination of care, and their own parallel fears. Then we find concerns regarding rehabilitation. Many patients describe breathing techniques and physical rehabilitation not as optional extras, but as empowering tools that help them to restore a sense of agency. So rehabilitation was experienced as a form of treatment in itself. Then regarding psychological support, and as you can imagine, also emerged as essential. Patients spoke about moving between resilience and vulnerability over the time. So emotional strain was not limited to crisis moment. It's a part of the long trajectory of living with a chronic condition. This led to one of the most important conclusions, and is that holistic care is not an option. Medication alone is not going to address everything patients live with: breath, fatigue, relationship, meaning, identity, mental well-being. All of these aspects need attention. And finally, autonomy was central across all the interviews. The persons that were interviewed continuously negotiate how to remain active, independent, and self-directed, even when their body becomes less and less predictable. So all these results, all these findings are showing how living with pulmonary fibrosis is a very complex experience that requires an integrated and person-centered support. Tamas? Or is me? No, it's you.
No, it's me. So if you listen carefully to these findings, then you will see that there are certain patterns emerging, and that's not by accident, because these patterns are partly predefined by the phenomenological methodology, and partly also are a result of what we found in the narratives of the participants. What is already defined in the phenomenological tradition is that we look at temporality, how the patient's relationship to time changes, right? So we've already mentioned that there is this heightened sense of insecurity due to a prognosis, which may or may not be true, but also the relationship of the patient to their body. So that's the embodiment aspect will change. Do you have the same relationship with your body as before, which becomes a very important question. Also, the relationship to space, to the world around you, so that spatiality will change. And last but not least, what is called intersubjectivity, which is your relationship or the patient's relationship to to other people, right? So this can be caregivers or family or loved ones, co-workers. And what we also found, because we always keep the door open to other key points to emerge from the interviews or from the analysis, what we've also found is the massive importance of resilience. There was a very astounding and also very reassuring confirmation of the concept that that resilience and survival go hand in hand. And there were fantastic examples for how resilience becomes a factor in the survival of patients living with pulmonary fibrosis. And so we really wanted to highlight this, and we will come back to speaking to this as we move on and talk about the results in more concrete terms by also giving you a couple of quotes from the interviews, anonymously, obviously, to illustrate these findings that we were outlining before. So, Daniela, it's over to you again.
Yeah, and I'm going to stress again what Tamas has already said. What we are going to present here is not the classical medical findings that we usually find in literature. It's much more about things that are missing from traditional research, but that are essential for understanding what people truly go through. So these results help to highlight unmet needs that may not appear in clinical consultations and that can guide more holistic care and support. So the goal of this section is to offer a different kind of knowledge grounded in lived experience that is going to complement medical approaches and bring, I hope, the patient perspective to the center. So let's start with receiving a diagnosis. One of the clearest findings is that diagnoses often take a long time. And for many people, the path to clarity was really slow, with periods of misdiagnosis, of ambiguous results, or uncertainty, as Tamas was saying. This is partly linked to the rare nature of pulmonary fibrosis and to the fact that information and expertise may not always be easily available. Participants also describe how prognosis can feel frightening or difficult to interpret. Early messages, as Thomas was saying before, about life expectancy sometimes stayed in people's mind for years, even when their personal trajectory turned out differently. What we see here is that diagnosis is not a medical event. It is a disruption in someone's life story. And many participants describe it as a moment after which everything is reorganized, future plans, priorities, and the sense of what is possible. So this section highlights how the diagnostic process itself shapes the experience of the disease from the very beginning. Slide. Here you will find some quotes that are going to show you the range of emotional responses that can accompany diagnosis. Some people describe it as a shock. For example, here in a timeline says these 2 years. Others express sadness, not only fear, but a deep sense of loss for the future that they had imagined. And at the same time, these accounts also show how the diagnosis can mark the beginning of a process of adaptation. One participant described how initial shock gradually transformed into determination, a decision to seek solutions, adjust, and continue to live actively. Tamas?
Yes, the next area that we wanted to present here is what it means to live with the disease, which we described as the ailment, right? So that this is not necessarily fun times, we've found. It is also not just about breathlessness, but it goes beyond breathlessness, because other organs and other functions will also break down and go awry. which means that even if it is not necessarily a described or a diagnosed comorbidity, there's a lot of additional conditions and challenges that the patients must face and cope with. There's pain, and there's pain that's not talked about very much. So pain is oftentimes overlooked. So is fatigue. Fatigue becomes a massive problem, which can be debilitating at a certain point. And all of this, obviously, and that's not exclusive to pulmonary fibrosis, but it happens with many, many other indications or diseases as well. Depression and anxiety prevail, and they may be in the background because there are other more important things to focus on for the patients, notably, for example, how to get air and sufficient amounts of oxygen. But all of this leads to a heightened level of depression and anxiety. Now, in case of scleroderma, we found that inflammation in general and the autoimmune symptoms will make life extremely complicated. So that's again an additional layer of difficulty. And interestingly, we've also found that that prednisone treatment is still pretty generally used in case of pulmonary fibrosis and also scleroderma. And we know that prednisone treatment is not an easy thing. It really isn't a walk in the park. It's very challenging with all the side effects. So that may also be for patients, patient organizations, an excellent advocacy point to ask for better options than prednisone, because oftentimes prednisone treatment doesn't make life easier, to the contrary. So that was an important or an interesting finding. Again, a couple of quotes to this point, which shows this constant deliberation about what to do, how to negotiate your illness. It also illustrates our points about depression and anxiety, the feeling of suffocation, of not the feeling that air, which is really taken for granted, you never think about breathing. Yet you have to relearn how to breathe, and you have to think about breathing all the time. Air becomes a rare commodity, and that's very anxiety inducing. And also a very important point in terms of treatment options, the oxygen tank, what it means to live with supplemental oxygen. And that actually the oxygen tank becomes part of your body. It becomes not just a medical device, but it is really something without which you cannot survive or barely survive. So that's another interesting aspect when it comes to discussing embodiment. Next point is over to Daniela.
Yes, and this is very linked to what Tamas has or just presented. One of the strongest themes across interviews was the fact that he was describing about how breathing, the very act of breathe, changes from something automatic to something that is conscious all the time. So participants were describing how they were constantly aware of their breathing, adjusting the breathing depending on the movement, on the effort, or anxiety. They also spoke about the role of exercise and routine. Even small forms of physical activity, rehabilitation, walking, breathing exercise were often experienced as important ways to regain confidence and to maintain stability. There were also some participants that mentioned spirituality or inner resources as part of coping. And what emerges here is that resilience is not only physical, it is deeply connected to how people make sense of their illness and how they integrate it into their lives. Overall, these findings highlight what we already know, that body and mind cannot be separated. Living with pulmonary fibrosis involves both physical adaptation and psychological adjustment, and supporting both dimensions is essential if we really want to reach a kind of well-being. If we look at the quotes, one person, Tamas, if you can change the slide, described pulmonary fibrosis as an emotional roller coaster with ups and downs that continue even if there are major interventions like transplantation. So this is a reminding on how the emotional fluctuation is part of living with a long-term condition. Another participant reflected on how individual attitudes or worldviews shape the experience of illness. People do not all respond in the same way, and coping strategies can differ greatly depending on personality, on values, and on their life context. So the quotes also show very concrete realities, how this oxygen dependence change what someone can physically do, how stairs or daily mobility become more challenging, and how these limitations are affecting their body and their mood. Tamas, to you.
Yes, we also wanted to come back again to talking about resilience as a key point. So the feeling of being in control, of my condition, being in control of my life, being in control of how I navigate this very difficult challenge was very, very prevalent. A very conscious approach transpired from all interviews, the ability to take autonomous decisions, to even circumvent the healthcare system, or to use the healthcare system in a creative or innovative way, if you like, by combining different specialists and obtaining second opinions. Simply not giving up, but going searching for solutions, and including alternative, less conventional ways of surviving, like the healing effect of singing on your breathing, or attending core sessions, and making music in order to structure your breathing, which is not part of the medical recommendations, right? But that's part of how you are resilient and how you cope in the face of difficulties, which ultimately also obviously leads to a change in mindset and to a different approach to life. Other things become important than what were important before. And that was very, very reflected in the responses. And we wanted to illustrate those points about resilience with these quotes. Several people mentioned that being not just a patient, but a person, and making sure that they can live their lives as a person was very important to them, and that living a full life remains important. Maybe it's redefined. Maybe a full life is something different after the diagnosis, or after having this illness, than it was before. It's still a full life nonetheless. Also, because what is valuable, what makes life full, becomes redefined. So suddenly a lot of things, because energy and air may be sparse, everything else becomes very valuable. So you plan differently, you approach your life differently, and maybe your values will also change. And that's all part of a resilient approach. That's all part of resilience, including the concept that you accept your illness and you try to make peace with your illness and get the most out of the situation that you can, which is also part of a resilient approach. Daniela, over to you.
Yes. So as you can imagine, participants consistently describe that living with pulmonary fibrosis cannot be addressed only through medication. Of course, that treatments are essential, but they not fully respond to every patient's experience. Breathlessness, fatigue, emotional strain, daily adaptations, relationships, and questions of meaning and identity, as Tamas was describing before. Many people also pointed out that healthcare often works in silos. This is not surprising for all of us that live with the different conditions. So when we have all these different specialists focusing on separate organs or symptoms, it's very difficult to put in mirror the patient's experience of the illness. That is a whole body and a whole life condition. So holistic care would mean that we need to recognize that support needs to include not only this medical treatment, but also all these other aspects about rehabilitation, the support, the practical guidance, better communication, and also means acknowledging that the everyday challenges of living with the disease, not only the clinical aspects, which is frequently the case. So if we see at the quotes, Tamas, we can see here that, for example, one person expressed very clearly that psychological support should be present from the moment of diagnosis as a part of care. Others describe how difficult it felt when there was no guidance or information, and when care was reduced to separate medical checkups without a broader support structure. At the same time, some quotes show that positive holistic care can look like. One participant explained how different professionals, nutritionists, rehabilitation teams, cardiologists, pneumologists, were communicating and working together. So this coordination gave them a stronger sense of self-management and confidence, and shows that it is possible, that there are good practices that might need to be replicated elsewhere. All these accounts remind us that patients do not only need prescriptions, is that they need listening, that they need this guidance and this continuity. And we need a healthcare system that is going to recognize the full experience of living with pulmonary fibrosis. Tamas.
And then finally, I wanted to spend really just a couple of, well, not even a minute, on this final finding with the two participants who underwent a lung transplantation, because there were some really interesting points about the concept of living with an alien organ in your body. Notably, both participants took a very different approach to what happened to them. One of them wanted and did ultimately keep in touch with the relatives of the donor, and has acknowledged their contribution to their life. On the other hand, the other participant did not. For them, they just wanted to move beyond this experience, acknowledging that it includes, specific challenges also to live with an organ transplant. But those challenges were not not related to the donor or these considerations about what it means to your life, that you carry the organ of another person. So that was very interesting. And this was obviously not subject of this particular piece of research, but it would be very interesting to take a deeper dive into this and take a deeper look at what is the phenomenology of organ transplantation, right? So what does it mean that you live with one or several organs from another person? So with this, I want to wrap up the presentation. We used literature. You will then have access to the slides and you can take a look at this. And we have a couple of minutes left for questions and answers and comments. So go ahead if you have any questions beyond.
Yes, I would like to thank everyone for being so active and for attending the webinar today. We are going to share with you the link to the recording. And I also would like to thank Björgen Ingelheim and Deepo for supporting this project, and also the wonderful research team that we have, Tamas, Daniela, and Dominic, for conducting all these interviews and providing such an important insights and such an incredible project. So we hope that we will have the next steps from this very good project, and we will keep you in the loop meanwhile. Thank you very much, and wishing you a wonderful rest of your day.